Welcome to Pedal Guys Talkabout. Today we're going to be talking about utility pedals.
Not necessarily the most exciting topic, but...
They're not sexy.
Not sexy.
But they are very necessary.
Very necessary.
And they're going to make you sound your best.
Necessexy.
Necessexy.
Right, a combination of the two. A portmanteau, if you will.
There you are.
Absolutely.
So we're looking at...
Yes.
Tuners.
Compressors. Loopers.
Gates.
Boosts, the oft-forgotten boost. We figured this week we were looking at Fairfield Circuitry, and they make a lot of pedals that enhance your sound and do things, to it. So we figured we'd talk about this week a few things that you guys can use, or a few simple things that you can kind of throw in your chain that are of the more utility side, but are very important.
Buffers.
Buffers, another one too.
Buffers
Sure, buffers.
So let's start with...
Where do you want to start?
The most important pedal that anyone can ever have on their board.
Absolutely.
Which is a tuner pedal.
Yes.
We don't really have to talk too much about it, but
no.
Listen, if you're not in tune, no one's going to want to listen to you play.
And no one's going to want to hang out with you. They're going to think you suck.
You can be the best
being in tune
player in the world, and if you're out of tune, it's going to sound
It's going to sound ridiculous, unless you're bending like Yngwie or whatever.
Right. But also... tuner pedals can have some other cool utilities too. I love just having the ability to have a kill signal.
Absolutely.
It's all your signals off when the tuner's on, and then it's back. Your signal's back when it's off, which is great for switching guitars.
Yeah. We do a lot of it on the show, so if you guys do anything like that, we are constantly stepping on that, so we don't get all the feedback.
Right. Also, I think for debugging, if you have something that's noisy, if you don't know what it is, like
true,
when you have that tuner pedal on, you know that everything before that is out of the signal. So if it's still noisy after that, then you know it's cable or pedal that's after that.
Exactly, or connection,
so,
right?
So that can be helpful.
That's a really good that's a really good way to isolate a problem. I never thought about it that way. You're right.
Not all pedals have it, but the old Boss TU2, I don't know if the 3 does,
Boss,
has an extra power out. So you could use that. You could use that pedal.
Yes.
Just plug that pedal in, and then have a daisy chain and pedal the rest of your board through the tuner pedal.
I have a Korg. One of the Korg pedals I have has that. I always wondered what it was for.
So
you can just daisy chain
that's a super
around.
cool feature too.
You have a small board, and you need to have a tuner on there. Mm-hmm. Make it do as much as possible. You know what I mean? Another thing that we were talking about earlier too is that if you kind of noodle around and you find a chord that you like, why not stomp on the tuner and just quickly find out where you're at, and what note you're playing in. It can help with songwriting
100%.
Or just even trying to get to, where's the next note? This is where F is.
When I end up doing that a lot is if I'm in an alter tuning, which I do a lot of alter tunings.
Yes.
And I'm like, this sounds cool. And if this was an E, I would know what it is, but I have no idea because I'm in some weird tuning.
Yeah.
So then you pop on the tuner. What's the root of that? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So then you can communicate with the rest of your band. Oh, okay, I'm playing.
It's in this. I know what fret it is, but I can't tell you what note it is.
Exactly.
Here it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I would say too, I learned this lesson with mine. Minimize the size of your tuner.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yes.
Now, I understand if you need visibility, but I will say a lot of them have LED screens that super
tuners
bright.
have come so far now.
Minimize so you can fit other delicious pedals on your board.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
enough about tuners.
Well, yeah, but probably more than you maybe necessarily ever thought, or more than you wanted to know, for sure.
Absolutely. Let's go to compressors.
Yeah, yes. Okay. So if you're in like a normal chain, you'd probably go tuner, at least on my board, tuner, compressor.
Yes, that is the most popular place to have your compressor.
So simply, what do we know about compressors?
The most simple way to explain it is that when you play a note, that's creating a sine wave, right?
Mm-hmm. Peaks and valleys.
And there's peaks and valleys. And so what a compressor is doing is that it's squashing that. So it's taking the peaks and the valleys, and they're bringing it more towards the middle. And so what that does is that it evens out your tone, evens out your sound.
So would you say it makes the quiet parts loud and the loud parts a little bit more quiet? Like it makes everything kind of even.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you're playing for chords, it's going to make, if let's say your pickups kind of pick up more bass, right? Mm-hmm. And they're kind of scooped. Well, then when you play a chord, you might be, especially complex chords, you might be losing some of those interesting notes that are in the middle there. When you put on a compressor, all of a sudden the volume of all those notes is more even, so it has more articulation and definition for complex chords.
Absolutely.
That's a really good use for
Yeah.
a compressor.
And that's like a basic way of doing it.
That's the most basic way.
That's kind of and that's the very technical kind of aspect of it. I think that's like how it works, right? But when you hear it, if you listen to a lot of funk players, a lot of people that play on Strats, you can hear that kind of chunky sound, that like chicka chicka sound.
Right. Percussive.
In like ska or something. A lot of the ways those guys got those sounds was from that like heavy compression that they're adding to it. But it really gives a pop and like a spank. Country guys love it.
Right. That
crisp
spankiness is like
the
classic, like twangy sound. That's compression.
And that's hot, and that's pretty. I mean, you're compressing it a lot if you want to get there.
And then also using compression to sustain your notes. So maybe you want to have a more lead tone that's going to sing and keep the notes going to continue even though the string isn't necessarily vibrating as long.
Right.
But you get that through distortion, a loud amp, a fuzz. But if let's say you want to get that sort of sustaining lead sound clean, that's where a compressor comes in.
Absolutely.
If it's really cranked, you can get this pushed singing sound without any distortion.
Exactly. And you can get a little bit more articulation in your fingers. You can kind of pick up, if you like a little bit more pick attack, you can pick up certain sounds that way. So it can completely change the kind of rhythmic and percussive and physical.
Right.
Kind of
another super important use for a compressor is if you're using it before synth pedals or pitch pedals.
Yeah.
Because that evening out of your sound means that's a more even signal for the synth or pitch pedal to process.
Yes.
So it makes the tracking a lot better.
Okay.
So that's why I have on my board I have the compressor right before the Enzo, so that it is tracking even better,
feeding it like the cleanest signal
feeding
that
it
you
the
could
cleanest,
get.
clearest, strongest, evenest signal.
Yes. Right. Which is why it's funny the Fairfield pedal is called the accountant, because it's basically cleaning up all your your things into one clean signal. So
totally.
That's a really good way to describe that. Do we want to talk about a function of a lot of compressor pedals is also a boost function?
Yes.
So that can be the kind of the segue into our next topic, which could be boost.
Boost. Yes.
Yeah.
So many good reasons to have a boost. Obviously, just to make your signal louder, right? That's what it's for. It's to make your signal louder. But it's so much more than that, because let's say you have just one pedal on your board. If you have a boost right in front of a tube amp, you can really get those tubes cooking and get an overdrive sound just by boosting your volume.
Exactly.
Let's say you have pickups between two guitars. You have single coils and you have a humbucker.
Yes.
Humbucker's super loud on its own. Single coils maybe not so much.
Slower output.
But but you don't want to hear that dip when you switch to the single coil guitar. Well, you put on a boost, now they're even.
Exactly. And it's one of those things, I think it comes from the times when people used to use amps and you would drive the amp harder by putting a boost in front of it, right? That was the original use. And I think people still use it that way, but I've seen boosts more at the ends of some people's drive sections than in the front. Yeah. Because especially something like, I have the Exotic EP boost.
Yep.
It's the boost section from the Echoplex, which is called the EP, Echoplex EP boost. Has a little bit of a character, but if you put it at the end of your drive section, you can kind of raise, it kind of gives it character while raising the volume a little bit too.
Right.
More clarity, a little bit softer on the attack. So a boost can be more than just driving the amp necessarily.
Absolutely. And something, speaking of compression, all dirt pedals are going to inherently compress your signal.
Yes.
And sometimes, especially when you're getting to really high gain territory, it can compress it so much that there might be a perceived volume drop.
Yes.
So sometimes it's nice to have a boost after to kind of bring that back.
Definitely. Definitely, because compression inherently will cause volume loss.
Right, exactly. And which is why a lot of these compression pedals have boosts.
Exactly. And some of the best overdrive sounds came from studio compression units that they were overdriving basically.
Yes.
So if you want to think of your first distortion pedal, it was probably like a rack mounted Audio Sonic or Universal Audio unit. So so boosts.
And also the way that you could really put one anywhere in your signal, because the way that pedals are going to interact, especially different dirt pedals or other compression pedals, or Actually, well, verb and modulation too. Every pedal is going to react differently if the front end of it is getting pushed harder.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you can really play with the boost anywhere in your signal and see how it plays with the other pedals.
Definitely. And even, I have a distortion pedal that has the boost built into it, and there's a definite difference when you have boost on and off, right? So using it to even drive distortion pedals, using it to drive the whole signal. Yeah, a lot of versatility. Like a lot of versatility.
Absolutely. So speaking of dirt, let's get into gates.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So you and I actually own 2 different gates. I think we should talk about why it's like, why we got them, but also like the main differences and actually why you don't own it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so the most common use for a gate is usually for really high gain metal players.
Yep.
So that when you're, if they weren't, everything's all cranked, you get a bunch of distortion, a bunch of volume going, it sounds great, but the second you stop playing, there's feedback,
and
there's
noisy.
noise, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So gate is going to clamp it so that when you're not playing, that noise is out of the signal.
Exactly.
But so a lot of, but it's really great for a lot of other reasons too. If you're, let's say you're playing with a lot of like time-based effects, and you want that kind of note separation between some different delayed things. Well, if you have a gate on, let's say you have this really delayed passage and you stop, you have another little delayed passage. It's gonna help articulate between different sections.
Definitely.
It just makes everything, cleans everything up, lowers the noise floor.
But it's also one of the secrets. I mean, if you're into gent or any of those like modern metal tones, that's how they get these precise sounds, is because it's really clamping down on it.
It's precision. That
gives you like a very, very precise.
Right. I would say that's the most important thing about gates is precision.
Right.
It doesn't have to be for just heavy metal players either.
Well, I mean, so we both actually had them on our board. So speaking of, we play a lot of different genres, and I think we go back and forth, but one of the reasons I even got one was because my Telecaster, you remember, we've played it. Was so noisy, just on its own.
Absolutely.
With the 60 cycle hum and everything. I love the pickups. I'm not going to change anything because I like the way it sounds, but just to get rid of that and not have it show up in recordings, it's such a lifesaver. I have it on all the time.
That's such a good point, because a lot of vintage single coil pickups sound amazing, have this really particular tonal quality, and they're noisy.
Yeah, totally.
And if you were to modify them, wax pot them or whatever to get rid of the noise, they wouldn't sound the same.
No.
So it's like you kind of have to live with that noise if you want that sound.
Exactly.
So, solution, you get a gate.
Now, there's a couple different types of gates.
Yes.
And the one I have is a little bit different. I have the Tone Reaper the Noise Reaper from Stone Deaf. Yeah. And then you had the Fortin
Zool.
Zool, right.
Yeah.
Right. So the Zool, where did you find it? You found it through Ola's channel?
Yep.
Okay. And Ola was playing it through the effects loop.
Right.
So, and then Sam put it on his board, and it would interact sometimes.
Yeah,
it was weird. Tell us about it.
It's super responsive. Yeah. Very simple design, very sleek. Really quick response. But I found that I wasn't getting the most out of it. It would. The way that I had to use it was to crank it maybe like a little before noon, and if I was doing heavier tones, that's fine, that's cool. But then if I'm trying to do like slightly overdriven tones, using it in a more subtle fashion, it wasn't as responsive as I would like, or I would have to turn it up to a point where
you completely cut the signal. Like
it would cut the signal, so then I couldn't go. If I went from a loud sound to a quieter sound, then all of a sudden it would just be cutting out when it wasn't supposed to.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that the whole point of that pedal is that it has this key function where you're supposed to put it itself in the effects loop of your amp, and then have a dry signal going out to the key function, so that it's cutting out where it needs to in the effects loop, but it's still listening to your dry signal, so that if you were to switch to a cleaner tone or whatever, it's still listening and it's still reacting in the same way.
Oh, interesting.
I use vintage tube amps that don't have effects loops.
Yes.
So I wasn't utilizing it to its full capacity.
Yeah.
Great pedal. It wasn't right for my rig.
Totally.
Is what I realized.
And I think there's a difference, because the Noise Reaper has It's basically got four, or it's two inputs.
It is a loop
on
in
side.
and of itself, right?
So you put it in your effects chain. So for example, I have mine. So what the actual chain looks like, it's the tuner, the compressor, the noise gate, right? Yep. Then it goes out to the tensor and then my amp. But in the loop of the noise gate are all of my dirt pedals. Right. So those exist in their own loop. So what the gate is essentially doing is it's listening for that sound and it's canceling out anything that's going through that's not that sound. Right. And this one happens just to be the way it's set up, the pedals I have on it, just from I run it with like 7 pedals in the loop, like 4, it still sounds fantastic. Yeah. It really does it. Now, one of the things I have run into with it, and one of the things you run into with this is the compressor doesn't behave in the loop because of the volume drops and the way that it kind of messes with your signal.
Right.
But outside of the loop, it's going to definitely raise your noise floor quite a bit.
Yep.
So I've had to fight the loop a little bit in where to set it
Interesting.
when I have it compressed, because it's almost sending, when I turn the compressor on, it's almost sending too much signal. So it wants to clamp down harder and faster. So I have to find a good sweet spot in between to really get it to work together.
Very cool.
That's the only thing I've had with it. But otherwise, it's been phenomenal. It's been on my board since I got it. I love it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So noise gates.
There you go. Loopers,
and looper pedals.
So yes, this is a perfect segue.
Yes.
So, as we just discussed, something like having a bunch of dirt pedals, right?
Yeah.
Really noisy. You could put all those in their own loop.
Yes.
Let's say you have a bunch of time-based effects that or you want to have be really washy, really big and long. Well, when you put them to those more extreme settings, you're going to lose your dry.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden you can't hear the initial dry signal. You're just hearing these blooms of
a big
time.
wash.
Yeah. So if you were to put those in a loop, you could have them on those extreme settings, but you're still going to maintain your dry signal outside of that loop.
Absolutely. And mixing, like, and then what we're kind of talking about too is like almost like track mixing on your board, right?
Exactly.
And using a loop and a loop that has volume adjustments and a mixer, maybe a feedback or something, to kind of blend your sound more together. Right, you're running your like dry and your wet over top of it, rather than always running it in series, right? Especially because you play through tube amps, right?
Yep.
So vintage tube amps, if you don't have an effects loop, how can you achieve that same sound through a tube amp? And this is one way you can do that.
So you can have looper for a looper pedal on your board. You can do all that same thing. Just instead of to the amp, you just have it controlled all on your board.
Exactly.
So something that I really like to do, as I was saying, is loops. A loop for me, it allows me to try these really extreme settings and then mix, and then never lose the articulation of your dry.
Exactly. It's almost like mixing practice, like mixing to even do your final mix, just in a live setting and actually working with your board. So look for, and what the looper we're talking about is not your like ditto loop. It's not your record a phrase and play it back necessarily. I think we should clear that up too, right? We're talking about putting a section of your pedal board in its own discrete circuit, and then passing that on to the next bit, and being able to blend those kind of different circuits.
Exactly.
I think looper pedals are just as important, right?
Sure.
But there's all sorts of looping options out there too, for controlling the order. So there's like the gig rig, and there's different switching systems, and all these different things you can get.
Absolutely.
There's some that are very expensive, some that aren't. So if you want to play with it, search Reverb for like loopers and stuff, and you can find like Saturn does some. They do things you can play with.
There's stuff that are super basic, like I think Boss has like an AB pedal.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
just like your
the line selector, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You have your A loop of pedals and your B loop of pedals. Just maybe it's just all your time bass and your dirt, or your time bass and your modulation, and then your dirt. Could be whatever.
Exactly.
And then again, going to these huge rigs that are like MIDI.
Equipped and digitally programmed.
So a really good way to better if you have a lot of pedals, it's a really good way to better utilize your whole board.
Yeah. It can help you organize. Really, it can take like a really messy board and kind of you might have to organize around one thing now. So it can help. It can force you into organization. So looper pedals are really cool.
And speaking of big boards, the final piece we'll look at is buffers.
Yes.
So the more we love pedals, obviously. The more pedals, the merrier. But the more pedals are in your rig, you basically just think about it as an extra run of cable.
You're adding capacitance, right?
You're adding capacitance.
Yes.
Every single pedal. And so on a board,
sucking your signal.
Yeah, on a board long enough, all of a sudden, all that capacitance has totally sucked your signal. So if you compare, this is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Plug directly into your amp. Adjust the volume to where maybe if you had a boost or something that would boost it up to. Listen to your tone, especially the high end.
Yeah.
And then go back, plug in your board, have all the pedals off.
Yep.
And then listen to the signal. And more likely than not, unless you have buffer pedals.
Sure.
Like whether they're their own buffer pedal or pedals that have a buffer circuit in
Built in them, yeah.
Unless you have those, you'll notice the signal loss.
Yes.
Which can just kind of to me, it's like a deadening of your sound.
Definitely. Definitely.
It kind of sounds less bright, less lively, less present.
Less clear, and I find that you have to, you often have to gain your pedals a little higher. You have to turn up the volume, which you don't really want to add that much gain. You don't want to play with that much if you don't have to. So it's a really easy way to get your pedal board in like kind of professional sounding shape.
Right.
And a lot of people say, right, you want to put one at the beginning and one at the end.
Correct.
Boss pedals have them built in.
Yes, so hot tip, every Boss pedal has a buffer.
Yeah, so even the TU tuner, right? Yeah, so
if you start and end your board with Boss pedals,
golden.
Good to go.
Golden.
And so, by the way, so what a buffer does is that it is bringing that signal back, that signal loss that you have from all that long run of cable. It's I don't know on a
think about like telephone wires,
yeah.
right? You need to run a really long telephone wire, electrical wire. You kind of need stations that power it up as it goes, so it's going to lose it, or you need to send a very high powered signal to get it to go there. So this is kind of like re-upping it. It's just taking it, it's cleaning it up, and at the beginning and at the end, it's cleaning it up again just to make sure. It's kind of bringing it right back to level where it needs to be.
So so there are many pedals that do have it, but there are also just individual units that are buffer units.
Yeah, you can. There's like little guys.
Yeah, they're just little tiny guys. And it's once you do that experiment that I was just talking about, and if you really hear that, you'll realize how important it is to have a buffer.
It is. And now I will say, and we both play vintage stuff, but I feel like you have a couple pedals that are probably more affected by buffers. You have to be careful about where you put vintage fuzzes and buffers.
That's true.
Some of them will not, and especially overdrive pedals, even before or after. Guitars want to see fuzz pedals anyway, but if you have a buffer between or a buffer after it, sometimes it can just splat the whole thing out. It does not sound good. So you really want to be careful with matching those two things.
Absolutely. I have the Analog Man Sunface that we demoed last week.
Last week, yeah.
I have the BC-183, and it there are a few different things I can put in front of it, but any buffer, it totally it
mangles the signal.
Yeah,
it's weird.
It mangles it in a really weird way. You can barely even get any sound out of it.
Yeah.
So
it's just one of those known things is that you really don't do that. Right. So that's part of it.
So so utility pedals.
Yeah,
it's all about making your signal as good as it can sound.
Absolutely.
Being in tune, having nice even sound, volume,
cleaned up,
clean, like as much presence and sparkle that is in your instrument, right? It's about maintaining the tone of your guitar and your amp,
exactly,
and allowing your pedals to enhance it and not letting them take away, because that's what you don't want your pedal board to be taking away from the tone of your guitar.
Yeah.
And
you're putting a lot of cable and a lot of electronics between you and the guitar, so you want to make sure that when you're doing that, you have it cleaned up and it sounds like it's supposed to sound. I have a feeling a lot of people play and they don't necessarily know how it's like not supposed to sound, but like even where line level is sometimes. Right. And I think if you follow a lot of these steps and you just kind of pick up the basics, it'll get you right there with some experimentation. Like that'll put you right on the doorstep. So it's really great. So I think
very good.
That's going to do it for this week.
Thank you so much, everyone. Please subscribe, give us a like
and subscribe.
And we'll see you in the next video.
We'll see you in the next video, guys. Bye.